Everyone, welcome to the Jackson Hole Historical Society and Museum's March Beers and Banter program, all about ski mountaineering and backcountry skiing. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to our panelists who you see on your screen and you're going to hear from tonight. We have Ed Bushnell, Kim Havell, Tom Turiano, and Molly Loomis Tyson. And I just, it really is because of you all that the museum is able to make these programs possible. And our incredible community members who have really neat stories to share. So no pressure, but really thank you guys for being a part of tonight. I know there are a lot of skiers and adventurers in the audience tonight. So looking forward and really relying on you all to help with the conversation, asking questions, providing comments. Please feel free to chime in. And I do just want to say, in Tom's book, Teton Skiing, A History and Guide to the Teton Range, you describe how you talked to over 300 ski pioneers to piece together the ski history of the Tetons and really tapped into our community's collective knowledge to put together that book. So everyone just know this is a small section, selection of folks who adventure in the mountains. And what's unique kind of about this group is then for the most part, you all then take that experience and expertise and share it either in guiding or writing or something. So that's really neat. And everyone on the in our audience, please check out Tom's books and other resources out there to learn more about the history of skiing in the Tetons. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Morgan Jowen, the director of the Historical Society and Museum. I will be facilitating the conversation tonight, but again, I encourage everyone to jump in. Please add your questions to the chat box or raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask it yourself. So just a few housekeeping things. We are recording tonight and the museum will make it available to the public on our YouTube page in about a week. And finally, if you enjoy what you see tonight, what you hear, if you're a lover of local history, please consider becoming a member or making a donation to the museum. Or if you have a kid or you know a young kid who is looking for something to do this summer, we just opened registration to our summer camps. So check that out. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I always like to have the panelists introduce themselves by sharing with us when and why did you first come to Jackson Hole and why did you decide to stay here? So, Tom, if you want to start us off, that would be great.
So I visited Jackson in 1981 on a family trip and then came again during college spring break trip in 1985, and I moved to Jackson later that fall after closing the book on my geophysics studies at Colorado School of Mines, and came here to ski and teach skiing, and then stayed.
I've been here ever since.
Yes.
Great. Awesome. I'm gonna go up who I see. Molly, you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure. I'm Molly Loomis Tyson, and I moved to, I've always lived on, well, I've lived in the park and on the Teton Valley side, and came here in, I think it was 2001. I spent a year after college ski bumming in Havell and driving a bus and teaching ski school, adaptive skiing. And I really wanted a place that had more of a reason for being just than being a resort. And a friend was coming up to Driggs for the winter, and at that point in time I was starting to work for Knowles. So just came to Teton Valley sight unseen, and sort of funny twist of fate, myself, Mark Fisher, who's a local photographer, producer, and a woman, Ellie Martin, we all subletted a house for a year, and turns out I'm still in that house in a different phase of life now as the owner. So still on the Teton Valley side. And I liked the fact that there was so much more to this place than just a ski resort. Targhee on our side, clearly. So
Kim?
So I was living in Telluride, Colorado, and I made a big move to Salt Lake, which was a big change. And it's kind of a sad story. I came up from Salt Lake to visit a friend, Steve Romeo, and we went out skiing. And a couple days later, he actually passed. But when I had come up to ski with him, he had sent me links for housing and things like that because I was trying to look for my next move. And I decided to come up here and kind of follow through on what we were talking about, and ended up loving it and staying here.
Thank you. Ed, when did
Hi,
you?
thanks. I grew up in Northern Connecticut, grew up skiing in the Berkshires of Massachusetts and in Vermont. Like Tom, I started coming out here in the early 80s for ski trips, a couple summer trips, a couple college trips, lived out here for a summer in college. And I moved out here again for the skiing. I thought, like so many people, it would be for a year or two. This is a hard place to leave. I've tried many, many times. The last time I left to go to law school and then practiced law in Oregon for 4 years. And while I was there, my wife and I realized we were following the 2012 election locally here in Jackson. And I can even tell you who our town councilors were in Lake Oswego, Oregon. And so I think we came back. We've got 2 daughters now. We came back for the community. I love living in a small town. I love the fact that I know all the people I'm going to see at Smith's. I didn't actually like the anonymity of a bigger town and city. So I say I came for the skiing and I stayed for the community.
It's huge. Awesome. Ed, you kind of answered this a little bit, and so I'm going to put it on the other panelists too. Go back even further, I'd love to hear when you first learned to ski, and where you were perhaps before Jackson, and if you have any fun stories of growing up skiing.
Did you want me to run with that, or
Sure, yeah, if you have more to expand on your Berkshires.
I was looking because I was hoping I could find it on my wall. I know it's here somewhere. One of the places I learned to ski was the backwoods of my house. My brother and my high school friend and I dubbed it Lakeside Lodge. Had about 100 vertical feet of cliffs, woods, whatnot. So I'd say that was my first taste of backcountry skiing. Grew up skiing at smaller resorts in Massachusetts like Catamount and Butternut. Eventually made my way up to Killington. And then my best friend from high school turned me on to Mad River Glen. I became a convert immediately, actually a shareholder of Mad River Glen now. So spent most of my later teen and college years skiing there.
I'm guessing you're
Everybody
boot
seems to have
packing up in
frozen
your
here.
backyard. Not skinny enough.
Oh yeah, hiking. Sorry, you all froze for a second. So.
Any other childhood ski stories or how you learned to ski?
I learned to ski in a very small resort in New Hampshire, the Woodbound Inn in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. It just had a rope tow, and I was honestly terrible at it. I was definitely the worst person in my family for the first couple of years. I didn't really know how to stop.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I think I have amazing memories from that. I loved it from the get-go. Most of the people in my family loved it as well. So we all skied together. And yeah, I think I mentioned to you before that I skied a lot at Killington. I don't have, you know, any definitive ski moments. They all kind of merged together over the years before I came out here.
Cool. Thanks, Ed. Tom, Kim, Molly?
Yeah, I can just say, because I'll follow Ed, because we have the same birthday and we have the same experience at our hometown ski areas back east. Him with the rope tow. There was a really scary T-bar at my ski area and I would not ride it. Instead, I would be seen sidestepping up in the trees on the side of the run. So yeah, my parents had me skiing at like age 3 or 4. And we had a backyard hill like Ed. where I learned to climb rock hard snow by scratching a tiny little ledge with the edge of my boot and standing up on it. There were a couple things that changed my life were these two movies. One was The Other Side of the Mountain. And in that movie, Beau Bridges, or his stunt double, is shown, they show him skiing down a run and wildly flying his outside ski in each turn. And I vowed to learn that turn someday. And I practiced it on our backyard hill, and I learned it on these little short skis. And then I brought it to Jackson, and I skied it in Jackson for many years in the 80s. Now I can't do it anymore. I tried it recently. I can't do it. The other was the movie called Fall Line, which came out in '79, and I watched it as a teenager. And that showed Steve Shea skiing the Grand in the middle. And that was impressive. And I think that video has influenced a lot of people to try the sport.
Get out into the mountains.
I learned, bless my mom, we had a little hill in our backyard in Maryland, and she would pull me up and down that hill with, an old pair of skis. And I remember the first time I went to a ski resort, Liberty Bell, I believe it was called, or Liberty Hill, and it's somewhere in Pennsylvania. And my mom had grown up skiing in Vermont. So it was very much a part of what she loved to do. And she had these phenomenal, brightly colored flowered pants that she still had in the 80s, or maybe they were from the 60s. I don't know, when we went skiing. And I still remember being so embarrassed as a young kid because people in line were pointing out, look at that lady in those pants. So it was a little traumatic, actually, but I later inherited those pants, and they've been up to the top of glory multiple times. So, and then I guess I was hell-bent on being a ski patroller. That just was what I wanted to do, which I eventually did do volunteer for a while. And that was the criteria for choosing a undergrad, much in part was somewhere where I could go to the mountains and ski. So I ended up in Colorado, and kept going from there. So.
Kim, where did you grow up skiing?
So I grew up abroad, but my father was an avid skier. So I started skiing around 2, but just here and there and everywhere. And then we moved back to New York when I was 11 years old. And then I started skiing on school trips and things like that up in the Northeast. And one particular trip just really stuck with me, and I loved it. It's some small resort in Vermont or New Hampshire. And then I decided to try to join the ski team in high school. I went away for high school and had to work really hard to get on the team because I didn't know how to ski race and really carve turns like that. But it was it just drew me, and it was fun to get off campus and go pursue that in your own time. And eventually I got on and then kept skiing.
You learned how to carve turns?
Yeah, more or less.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Tom, I have a question for you, and I didn't include this in our emails, but I know you've done a lot of research of the area, and I was curious if you could describe some of the earliest skiing in the Tetons and any highlights from your research that you found really interesting. And I think my understanding is people have probably been skiing here in some form or another for centuries, right? So I don't know if you have any fun historical tidbits for us.
Yeah, I kind of answered that in your question. Any ski pioneers you look to as role models, and why? And if you don't mind, I'll share my screen.
Sure.
I prepared a few photos here.
Great.
I have to get the right image up first, though. There we go. Share. So, of course, Bill Briggs, he was a role model to me as the first to ski the South Teton, Middle Teton, Grand Teton, Mount Owen, Mount Moran. and he inspired so many to follow in his footsteps. Personally, for me, he was my employer as a ski instructor at Snow King in the 80s and a mentor. I trained as an instructor and guide under Bill for 3 years. He has very detailed courses on becoming a ski instructor and a ski guide. So I took all those and learned a lot. Learned firsthand about his approach to skiing the high peaks in particular. And he was a friend. I rented a room in Bill's house for 4 years, so we got to know each other quite well. And if he's out there, hi, Bill. Good to
Bill is on the call tonight.
Oh, he is?
To our participant list. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, even before Bill, to answer your question about the early skiers, the most intriguing to me was this guy, Fred Brown. And while researching my first book, I got little hints about who Fred was and what he did from various articles and some interviews, and from the column that Fred wrote on ski technique in the Jackson newspaper during the 1930s. And in that, I learned that Fred was the founder of the Jackson Hole Ski Association, which worked to provide educational skiing opportunities for kids growing up in Jackson Hole. And I learned that in an interview with Betty Woolsey, that Fred had toured from Yellowstone to the Green River Basin and from Idaho to the Wind River Valley, which is basically a lot of country. And that was inspiring to me. I was like, I have to find out more about where this guy had gone. Maybe he skied all this stuff before anybody did. And that was intriguing to me, because with that old gear and a 1930s perspective, it was kind of just very interesting to imagine what it must have been like for him to have kind of the same interest I do in the 1990s or 1980s, with all this wonderful gear and a modern life. I also interviewed Paul Petzold in the 90s and learned that Paul and Fred essentially pioneered recreational skiing on Teton Pass in the 30s. They hitched rides up on the mail sleigh. And actually, I should say, even in the 20s, Paul was doing it. Actually, both of them were doing it. They'd hitch a ride up on the mail sleigh, and then they would ski down, kind of Chinese downhill style. They wouldn't stop, and they'd go all the way back down to Trail Creek Ranch. And Paul told me that in one day they did 12 runs in perfect powder, and they were like nonstop the whole time.
Do you have other photos of Fred and Paul? Sorry, it's not switching.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I skipped changing the photos. Yeah, so there's Fred. This is probably, I don't know, he's probably what, 25 there. So this is probably in the late 30s, early 40s. He's a darn good skier for that time.
In that gear, for sure.
Yeah, look at that. He's carving a turn. Fred was Petzold's partner on the first winter ascent of the Grand in 36 or 37. And from what I've been able to find, the two, Paul and Fred, were the most accomplished backcountry skiers of the day. By 1940, Fred and another friend painted this beautiful guidebook map of Teton Pass. And it shows, there's the pass, and it shows all these runs off of the ridges north of the pass, off to the east and west, down to Ski Lake, and the routes back to Crater Lake. And it shows all these runs, Edelweiss and down Black Canyon, and all the runs on Trail Creek. This is where I got the name Mount Sharples, right there. I don't know if you can see that in the lower left. Can you see my mount? No, you can't see my.
I can see your cursor.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yeah. I like how Black Canyon's a novice run.
I know.
They are.
But what intrigued me most about Fred was just his adventurous spirit. And I wanted to, learn about his big tours. I did learn from Betty Woolsey that he had traversed the Teton Crest several times and did some tours up in the northern Tetons. So I wanted to, around the year 2000, I wanted to write an article about Fred. So I wanted to dig in deeper. I still couldn't find anything about his life. I interviewed Ted Major. He didn't know too many details about Fred. So as time went on, I kind of gave up on the article. I worked on my book, Select Peaks, and I think I mentioned him in there, but I didn't really have the details on Fred. And then I took a break from writing books, and then when I worked on the South book, again, I put a little bit about Fred in there, but I just didn't have time to really dig in. The same thing happened with the Teton Pass book. I wanted to do that book and finish it in a year. So I really kind of cranked on that. And I kind of, at that point, I said, I don't have time to research Fred because I'm going to do this in a year. So I put a little bit in there on him. And then just before the book kind of went to press, I said, you know what? I've never Googled Fred Brown, Teton Pass, Teton skiing. Because all that other work I had done in the books was pre-internet. I was like, let's just try Googling Fred Brown. And boom, up comes, you can see me, up comes this book, A Compass and a Chart, the life of Fred Brown, philosopher and mountaineer. And it's written by this guy, Van Andrus from British Columbia, who I subsequently contacted. And we've become good friends because of our connection with Fred Brown. Van, of course, knew Fred personally after Fred moved to British Columbia in the 60s. I never met Fred, of course. He died in 1983 in British Columbia. But I have the connection with him sort of through the ethers or whatever. And so Van didn't really know much about Fred's early life. So, Van wrote about his later life in this book, which is a phenomenal read. And it's just an amazing life that he had. So I'll leave it at that because I could go on for an hour about Fred Brown and his later life. But this book, I donated a copy to the library, so you can find one there. Yeah, so those two, Bill and Fred, for me, have been the mentors and inspiration for researching and skiing. Oh, I do have a couple more shots of Fred here.
Love these old photos. Gosh.
Here's one of Fred during one of his traverses, lighting up for a little break there. Sleeping bag. And look at those old boots. And then his little tent and his campfire.
Wow. Rugged. We'll continue kind of this thread. Do our other panelists have ski pioneers or early skiers that you look to as role models or mentors or inspiration with your skiing today?
I did an interview with Muggs, who was a co-owner of Trail Creek, with Betty Woolsey last year. And I thought it was pretty funny when she told me that she stopped skiing Teton Pass in the 1980s because it got too crowded.
Oh, different perspective.
We had a lot of untouched powder for a long time.
80s, that's when it started to get busy. I would have thought it was later, but
Yeah. Muggs, a couple more people out there.
Yeah, comparative, probably.
Yeah.
I will say that one of the reasons I'm honored to be on the panel today is I've honestly always looked up to Tom. As you saw, he held up every single one of his books. And, you know, I moved here in 92, and it was not until really about 98, 99 that I started doing a lot of backcountry skiing. And two pivotal events happened right then. I met my own ski mentor, who hopefully is watching today, Brian Ladd, who's got exceedingly good judgment and is a great partner in the mountains and is always willing to push me. He's been a phenomenal mentor. But around the same time as that, Tom published this book. And I've showed this to Tom before, but it's just filled with pages and pages of lists and notes and underlines and things like that. I actually would pack this in my backpack, much to the chagrin of my partner Brian Ladd, who always chastised me for carrying too much weight into the mountains, like when I brought blue jeans and oranges, for instance. But in any case, I would bring this book with me on ski mountaineering trips and read it in the tent. And so I guess I owe a lot to Tom for the guidance in his book, and of course, not just the guidebooks, but this being the Historical Society, I really should note that these books are so rich with the history of Teton skiing or even Greater Yellowstone skiing and mountaineering in general. They make for fascinating reads. So that's been huge for me.
Thanks.
Really incredible research, Tom, in those books.
Thank you.
Yeah. Molly, any mentors other than your mom with your ski?
Yes, a lot. And I'll just say there was some fatalities in another state this winter, and some friends were asking me, you know, what do you think of skiing fatalities? Sorry, involving tree well, and you know, they're asking me, Molly, what do you think? Any thoughts on all of this? And one of the things not knowing the people involved, but just from an outside perspective, one of the things I responded to them, these are all moms of kids that ski, was just the importance of mentors. And so I think the question in and of itself that you are asking is such an important one for us all, both reflecting on who our mentors have been, but also as we all age, who knows what the age spread in this call is, but looking for those opportunities to mentor others, and hopefully that willingness in younger people to want to be mentored, that adults aren't totally dorky and lame. But I just think that relationship and that lineage is sometimes underemphasized, both in terms of the richness that it brings to the sport and the culture, but there's also a really important safety component to it too, that I think is we sometimes is helpful to emphasize. But Mark and Rod, it's a couple of people, Mark and Rod Newcomb, for me were huge mentors. In so many ways, I had the opportunity both to write about them and work with them at Exum when I was a guide there. And one of my first, and I just really respected both of them for not only the quality of their ascents and descents, but also their technical skills, but also their people skills, and just this phenomenal humility and ease of being around them. You know, I think one of my first, you have to go through an auditing series before you're allowed to guide on the Grand. And one of my audits was with Rod towards the end of his time guiding up there. And it was a really strange eve. I was so, you know, oh my God, I'm going out with Rod Newcomb, you know, that's like, oh, and sure enough, we were wandering up above the Black Dike, and it was super foggy. And I remember him, you know, I'm like, oh, good Lord, how would I ever be able to figure this out on my own? This is so, I'm totally lost up here. And Rod actually turned around and admitted, yeah, I'm kind of turned around too. You know, here's this guy who's been, you know, climbing it, you know, for decades. And to me, that was so, that's to me what a real good role model is that willingness to admit when they don't know and have that humility. And I would say then stepping into working as a climbing ranger at Jenny Lake, just all the guys there were mentors of the highest caliber you could ever hope to have. And it's also a group of guys that aren't looking for the culture is not such that their names are out there, and yet they are some of the most phenomenal mentors one could ever hope to have. So yeah.
Thanks, Molly. And hi, Rod, who is on the call also.
Oh, hi, Rod.
He has been a part of a few of our programs.
I don't know if you remember that, Rod.
I'm sure he enjoyed that. Great. So I think we'd all love to hear now about some of your ski adventures in the Tetons. And so this may be hard, but I put it to you guys to prep for this of kind of what is one of your most memorable ski adventures in the Tetons and why? Do you want to talk about one specific trip? We'd love to hear that. Ed, do you want to start?
Sure. I shared some photos with you, and I don't know if you could share them, and I'll just rattle off depending on what photo comes up. That'd be fantastic. These are almost all of these are old photos. I think they're from about 1999 to 2005. That's Brandon Spackman, who's an absolute amazing skier. And this is actually my very favorite ski day ever. That is his, well, yeah, we'll get to that in a second. This is the northeast ridge of Mount Moran. That's the East Horn in the background. That's, well, okay. They're both the same place. One's on the ascent, one's on the descent. That's Brandon Spackman descending the northeast ridge of Mount Moran, May 18th, 2003. The next picture is his brother Jared ascending the northeast ridge of Mount Moran. That is actually possibly one of my favorite pictures in the world. For about 10 years, it was my screensaver. This trip had everything. We had Brian Ladd and the Spackman brothers. The four of us did a lot of skiing together. We still get out occasionally, but did a lot of skiing together between about 2002 and 2006. And on this trip, we had canoed across Jackson Lake after it had melted. Just things really, really fell into place. As you can see, it's fairly firm snow going up. It was absolute beautiful corn coming down. You got to take the good with the bad and ski mountaineering. Forrest McCarthy might be watching right now, but he always said, you know, it's ski mountaineering when the skiing sucks. The skiing was phenomenal on this day, but the very next day, Brandon and I went back up to the summit of Mount Moran, and weather came in and it didn't soften up, and we had to ski down in ice, and it was absolutely terrifying. But that was a banner weekend for me. If you could go into the next picture, please. Thank you. Oh, that's again the ascent of the northeast ridge of Mount Moran with Jackson Lake in the background. Okay. This is awesome. That guy's name is Adam Sargent. I think he's a teacher in the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont right now. But in the summer of 2001, decided to try to ski through every month of the summer, and I started a streak that's actually still going to this day. But this was September 1st, 2001. It was my 11th month in a row of skiing. We actually had a decent experience that day. We climbed Nez Perce, and then we decided to try to go skiing. I think this stands out as the single worst ski conditions I've ever encountered in my life. These sun cups, if you can call them that, were between 18 inches and 3 feet high, and they were very icy. It was not fun, but it was funny at least. Okay, so that was exciting.
This is what you skied down?
Yes, that's what we skied down. Yeah, that was about the best snow we found that day. Oh, this is another awesome day. Drew Birnbaum, Kyle Tranby, Brian Ladd, trying to find a route up to the Sickle Couloir on the night of June 29th, 2002. There was quite a bit of bushwhacking. I think Brian takes exception. He says the bushwhacking's worse in the Pacific Northwest, but that was about the worst I've ever encountered. Good ski after that, but I guess that late in the season, you're going to get a lot of that undergrowth. Oh, this is a good example of, as I said, my mentor, Brian, has very good judgment. And there are about a half a dozen times when he has chosen to turn around and I've stubbornly decided to try to go on ahead. It's always a bad idea if Brian's turning around for me to go on ahead. And I'd like to think that over the years, my passion has cooled to the point where I display better judgment. But this was on what they call the Nuke Couloir, the North Couloir, right on the north peak of Buck. I was trying to get up it and the mountain just started sliding down all around me. Brian went up on a neighboring mountain and he took a picture. I'm that little dot in the top. And while I was trying to ski down, a slough came off, missed me by not that much, and shot right through. Something that's a little chilling about this this picture, by the way, is up in the top, it almost looks like a bit of a skull or something. But it was a scary experience. I seem to recall getting down to the bottom of that ski and Brian saying, "I really question your judgment sometimes," which was a very fair thing for him to say. And honestly, that might have been another trip where I displayed poor judgment. I'm not sure. Okay. That is Brian at the summit of Bivouac Peak. And that was actually late ski, believe it or not. It doesn't look like in that picture, but it was mid-June, I think, of 1999. But that was on the southeast couloir of Bivouac Peak, and just all around phenomenal ski. Looking back of these skis, we have good conditions on some of them. We have bad conditions on some of them. What makes a ski trip a phenomenal ski trip, when you get down to it, is the company that you keep on it. I do a lot of touring by myself because not a lot of people want to go up in July and August. And it's always nice to get up in the mountains, but it's much, much better with friends. So those are some of my favorite trips in the mountains. I think that was the last picture I had.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. How many consecutive months have you been skiing now?
Now, as of now, it's 245.
Wow. Okay. Other panelists? Kim, Molly, Tom?
Pick one of us.
Memorable trip that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I've got one that's kind of relates to the weather today a little bit. It's been warm. It's almost into April now, and I think today was, for me, very instructive about the destructive power of the sun in the Tetons. And the Tetons are so steep and they face right into the sun. So it's just, the sun is your enemy in the Tetons. The quality just goes downhill really fast. And so I thought of this tour that I did with Hans Johnstone in 96 or so, before this day today. But today was like the perfect reminder of how nice it is when you don't have the sun beating on the snow. And it was so good all day, even down at the bottom elevations. And it was, I think it was April 16th, 1996, maybe, and it snowed 30 inches overnight. And I called up, it was a surprise storm, and I called up Hans at like 7:30 or 8 in the morning. And I said, "We got to go do something. It's perfect. And it's kind of cloudy, so the sun's not going to wreck it." And so we said, "Well, let's go for the apex of Turiano." And here's Hans. And so you can see the kind of the clouds in the background, and the mist was keeping the sun kind of off the snow. Although it peaked out here, you can see Hans's shadow. But here's the apex, and when we got to the apex, we're like, it's it's still cold. Let's just keep going until the sun starts to really come out. So we kept going, and on up we went. And before we knew it, we were on the top. And it took us, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours to get to the top. But so this is like 3 o'clock or 3:30, but it stayed kind of this foggy, cloudy day, and the snow just stayed really good. And we had the most phenomenal run all the way down. And just, that was one of the more memorable days. And like Ed said, it's also about the partner. Hans is a great partner. Very smart and careful, and but also driven, and he'll push you to go. So anyway, Hans, if you're on the call, how you doing? Thanks for the great memories.
I think Hans is.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you guys brought the crowd. It's great. Awesome. Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Kim, you have a memorable ski trip in the Tetons you want to share?
You know, I think I missed that prep question, but
All memorable?
I say, you know, I'm a late starter in the Tetons compared to this crew. Very late, really. But when I moved here that first season, 2012-13, I'd say overall, the season for me, I had a opportunity as a professional athlete. I had support to just go skiing, which is very special time, especially as an older athlete. And so I just had a ball every single time. I got to discover the Tetons, and I think that's, yeah, really unique. I didn't have to fit it in on the weekends. It happened to be a very stable season, and I really love skiing new lines. So, you know, every other day or every couple days we got to go. I had a great group of partners that I met here, and we got to go out and explore. And you know, it was a great learning curve too. I tried quite a few bigger lines, 2 or 3 or 4 times. And I'd say one of the culminations of that was probably skiing the Otter Body, which took 3 tries to get it right for various different reasons. But, you know, just, yeah, I think having the opportunity to just go and romp around in the different canyons and try things and try to get them in the right conditions and experience it all with great people is what was really a turning point for me here, and kind of explained a lot of the magic of the Tetons and helped me to stay.
That does sound like a special winter. Sure. Molly, memorable trip?
Yeah, two come to mind. None of them are anything crazy, but nonetheless, just still such, you know, you never know what memories are going to be the ones that stick with you. And one is on the west side of the Tetons, the yurt system there, a crew of friends who would go up annually every year. And one year, we were going up to the Baldy yurt, and someone had just gotten a snow machine. Just, you know, that was a new toy for one of the members of the group. And so they went the one way with all of our stuff. And of course we packed really, really heavy, excited to have the opportunity for once to not be carrying our own stuff in. Meanwhile, the rest of then another group skinned in the shorter, more direct way. And we get there and it's cold, we're cold. Snow machine's not coming. Where's our food? Where's our clothing? Where's the booze? And turns out the snow machine doesn't make it. And so we end up spending that. We have, I think, 1 power bar between the 5 of us and gummy bears. So we make, and someone had a bag of carrots. So making little dinner hors d'oeuvres and piling mattresses on top of ourselves because we couldn't access the sleeping bags. So we piled mattresses on top of ourselves for warmth. So it was a memorable night. Next day, the snow machines get there. Everything works out. But what was so memorable about it was, one, that it was clear. Often those yurts are fogged in, and we just had phenomenal skiing. And at one point we're all dog people. We were bummed to have to leave the dogs at home, but so it goes with the yurts. And heading out, going up this ridge and toward I'm forgetting the name of the peak there, in the Bramble Mountain, I think, in the back there. And all of a sudden I say to my Mulv, is that a dog? I mean, it didn't make any sense, but that was the automatic reaction. And there's this black wolf. And sure enough, there were 3 others behind it, just charging right up this incredibly steep slope, right up the face of it, right up the gut. Watching him was phenomenal, and then pop over the ridgeline. And so for me to have a wildlife moment like that was just incredible. And right 4 miles from my house, see wolves like that out in the wild was pretty special. I think those were the first time I'd seen wolves on the west side of the Tetons. And then another one that sticks in mind is after my husband died, along with AJ Linnell and some other men who were, AJ and Andy were big skiers and skied a lot. And for some reason we got in our heads afterwards, there were probably 15, 20 of us who all climbed Glory after the accident in blue jeans and skied. I'm not sure why or how that got in our head, but that became the thing to do, was skiing Glory in blue jeans on a beautiful day. And stuff, again, going back to the partners and the people that you ski with is such a crucial key part of it. So those are 2 memories that stick out for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Molly.
Mhm.
I think I'm going to ask one more of my questions and then invite folks who are listening to please ask questions, whether it's for all the panelists or one of these guys, throw it into the chat box or raise your hand. But one last question I have is about what changes have you experienced over time here in Jackson? How has gear, technology, users, the Teton Pass busyness, how has it all changed? What stands out in your mind, whether it be, positive, negative change?
On a tangent of that, I'd say that I'm very impressed with some of my young coworkers at Exum and a lot of the folks getting out there right now with the link ups and their creativity and what they're doing in the Tetons. There's some pretty extraordinary skiing going on, and the longevity of the days and the involvement of the tours and what they're taking on is extremely impressive. The list of names is long, but it's they're just doing really neat things. And one thing off of that is that I've learned a lot from some of them, mainly in some ways the name, some of the routes from the original pioneers, which I'm sure Tom will document down the road. But some of the names are, for example, on Mount Woodring, there's a run called the Fallopian Tube, which I think is kind of unfortunate. It's a beautiful ski run, and it actually was first skied by Greg Collins and Andy Carson. I don't know when, Tom might know, but anyway, they went up to climb a route on Mount Woodring, and they brought their skis, and then they decided to descend that route after their rock climb. And so they originally called it Carson's North Couloir, and then it evolved to this in modern day. So I think having some respect for the folks that have really established a lot of what we're all exploring and discovering in our own ways is important. And also recognizing the brilliance of the current generation and where they're taking things. Technology aside and all that sort of thing, you need to know what you're doing to accomplish what the folks are doing out there right now. And gosh, it's amazing to think, like, where will things be in 10 or 20 years, really?
That was great. Yeah.
Tom, Ed, something to add about changes you've experienced?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly mention, the obvious thing is how crowded it's gotten. And it's hard to find a place to park on top of Teton Pass. It's hard. Last year, I decided to climb up Mount Albright, and it looked like the South Hoback, the way it was chewed up. It was after a long high pressure system, so it makes sense. And I've got mixed feelings about it. The selfish part of me is like, I loved being up there 20 years ago when no one was there, but I love getting up in the mountains, and I love that so many people are getting up in the mountains. And to be perfectly honest, even though the Tetons are a relatively small mountain range, there are still plenty of places you can go and you're just not really going to see many people. Yeah, if you're on 25 Short or Mount Albright or Teton Pass, you're going to see a ton of people. But the crowding is, it adds another wrench in the logistics of say planning a day, and sometimes I could get down about it. Sometimes I can look at a glass half full and say, wow, there's a lot of people that are getting out here and appreciating this. So I've really got mixed feelings about it. The one other thing I was saying, I did see this goes into a question from the for all panelists about trying to ski in equipment that earlier skiers used from the 30s or 40s. I certainly have never done that, but the equipment has changed so much. I got my first pair of AT, like alpine touring skis, right as I really got into this. But I'd say my first 3 or 4 years, when my first trip up Mount Moran was on old Rosinal 7Gs with Reichley boots. I mean, full alpine gear. I suspect even if I went back and tried to ski on that sort of setup now, I'd have a really hard time doing it, let alone something from the 30s and 40s. The equipment has been revolutionary. I have a very light pair of skis right now that gives me 90% of the stability of a downhill pair. So
yeah, huge advances there. Tom, any big changes that stand out in your mind? And also, do you have a set from the 30s or 40s that you like to take out on the weekends to ski?
Yeah, I wish I had the opportunity to ski something like that. They're always hanging on someone's wall. Like Briggs had his old head skis with Spademan bindings up on the wall, and I never asked him if I could use them, but I should have. And he had his old boots up there too. Can't remember what those were called, but so I have not skied any old equipment except for in the 80s when it was old modern equipment anyway. There's the question about how climate change is impacting the quality of the snow. That one I've definitely noticed changes. Mainly it's in the low temperatures in the fall. They just don't get as cold as they used to. And then in the high temperatures in the spring, it just gets way warmer way earlier than it used to. And the snow disappears a month sooner than it used to. And the big one that really wrecks the skiing, I don't mind the snow disappearing fast, but it needs to freeze at night in the spring. And that when it doesn't freeze at night, that's the end of the season. And that's kind of sad when it ends in end of April or early May, which it has recently in the last year, I believe, or the year before. But then every once in a while we get, like 2011 when it was good right through into July. So, and then I have noticed, with climate change, that directly impacts the survival of the mountain pine beetle. And so we, used to be able to ski through these beautiful forests of white bark pine, and now most of them are dead. So it's a different experience. It's like skiing through this, just a dead forest, and it's kind of sad. It's beautiful, but it's stark. And remembering what it was like to ski through those bushy white bark pines, especially, that was the difference is dramatic.
Molly, not to generalize, but I think kind of this, perhaps climate change connects to what you do today, right? If you want to speak about kind of the work and advocacy you do with the Northern Rockies Conservation Coalition and other things.
Yeah, I've just been back in school for a degree in environmental management, and maybe I think that, so I haven't been able to ski the last number of years for a variety of reasons, including being in school. Oh God, I mean, where do you start with climate change? I mean, it's everything. I do think I was involved a number of years on, and this maybe falls a little outside of skiing, but I mean, I guess it doesn't really, but in some of the glacier surveys on the glaciers in the park, where we'd be out mapping them. And yeah, it's happening. I mean, I don't think anyone in this call would be surprised to hear that. I do think one, in terms of the alpine, an interesting component to think about is definitely the temperature, like not having as, and I'm not saying this definitively, I'm saying this as a sort of question mark, something to think about, something we should all be thinking about, is how the freeze thaw cycle has changed in terms of just holding the rocks together. You know, a lot of the rock routes, the mountaineering routes, the ski mountaineering routes are in loose, unstable terrain, and without that heavier, higher snowpack that sticks around for longer, that starts to change. You start to see rock fall in different places or with increasing frequency. So that's one that comes to mind, aside, you know, in addition to the ones we're more aware of what's happening to the pika, what's happening to the white bark pines and the grizzlies, all, you know, I mean, on and on and on. So yeah. But I maybe add one more thought about how things are changing. And again, I haven't been able to ski much the last number of years for a variety of reasons, but I do think something interesting to consider, and I know in some writing projects around avalanches and risk, and particularly talking to folks down in the Wasatch, social media being a really interesting driver of behavior, risk-taking, what people are choosing to do. And I think for many of us when we were coming up, that really wasn't a factor. I mean, it didn't exist. So that's a real interesting one to be aware of, how that's shaping attitudes. So
thanks, Molly. We are at 8 o'clock, and this is maybe a quick question, but a great one to end on, from an audience member. And if you're willing to share this, what's your favorite line in the Tetons? Do you have a favorite line to ski, or would you prefer to keep that to yourself?
My favorite line evolves over time. I mean, back 20 years ago, I really liked to ski the steep stuff. I liked to try to do something that maybe hadn't been done before. That was important to me. Now I've just moved on to other facets of my life. And so what might have been a favorite line 20 years ago isn't necessarily a favorite line now. I can tell you it's what I'm doing, and it's who I'm doing it with. 2 years ago, I went and skied Rock Chuck Peak with two very, very close friends. And Rock Chuck Peak is a small peak in the Tetons. It's actually notable because it's the first Teton peak I ever skied, and that was only the second time I went back to it. But that was just one of the best days I've ever had in my life. It was perfect corn, and the company was amazing. So what would be my favorite line does evolve over time. I mean, I love the classic routes. You saw my pictures of Mount Moran. I love certain routes off of Buck and Prospectors, the Middle Teton, but I can't really actually say right now what my favorite line would be.
Yeah, I'm like that. I have nothing's popped into my head as, oh, that's my favorite line. Yeah, so it's a tough one, Jim. Sorry.
Yeah, agreed. I don't really ever have favorites because every experience is different and new on every single day. So it's all good out there on the right day.
Yeah, agreed. The people, the animals, the snow, the day, it all something great to be found in every day you're out there.
Great. Well, thank you all. This has been really fantastic. I just wanted to end with a quote. I was refreshing my my understanding of Tom's and reading of Tom's books before this program, and Muggs has come up a few times tonight from Trail Creek Ranch, and you included a really great quote from Muggs, Tom, in one of your books, where Schultz recalls that and talking about Trail Creek Ranch and Betty Woolsey and Muggs Schultz skiing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, taking their guests up Teton Pass, and you say Schultz recalls that the townspeople, quote, all kind of thought we were out of our minds. If anyone climbed to ski, they had to be crazy. So I just thought that was a really fantastic quote, and clearly not true today. You know, this is such a popular thing here, and something that most of us love to do and respect. You know, the folks who are getting out there every day, every week, every month. So thank you guys so much for sharing your stories tonight. And with that, and thank you all for tuning in and listening. Yeah, I think we've dropped some links into the chat box to Tom's books. So check them out to learn more. Okay, thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy turns.
Happy turns.